Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to share with you a game that two of my students played a while ago, and you'll see some pretty good moves and some not so good ones. And the whole idea is that you understand the mistakes, that you will not repeat them in your own games. It's always better to learn from somebody else's mistakes than your own. Let's get to it, and this is the position. The starting position, and started with e4, very common obviously, and black chose the Sicilian. Other very common and good responses are to play e5, very common obviously, or to play the French defense and then follow it up by again putting a pawn in the middle, in the center, or the Caro-Kann defense, also preparing then on the next move to play d5. So any of these starting moves are pretty much equally reputable and good. This game, black chose c5, which is considered the most active, the most ambitious opening response to white's king pawn to e4 first move. White's response was knight f3, developing the knight in a way that it controls two of the important center squares, the most common move. Here black can choose between many decent and popular choices, for example, developing the knight to also control the center, or for example, playing d6, opening up the development of the light-squared bishop, or playing e6, opening up the diagonal of the other bishop. So all of these second moves in this position are, I would say, equally good and reputable. Black chose a side variation, a move that's not considered as one of the very best, but it's still not considered a mistake either. Black is developing and moreover creating an immediate threat. I can't stress it enough how important it is at every single move be aware of what the threats of the opponent are. Whether there are threats or there aren't, you need to ask yourself the question, after your opponent makes a move, why did he or she make that move? Did my opponent attack any of my pieces, even if it's the least valuable one, the pawn? Like in this case, the answer would be yes. Black immediately targeted our pawn on e4. That pawn is under the attack right now, and if we would make a ignorant move, for example, a move that normally would be good, it's good in the sense that it develops, it clears the space between the white king and the rook, which means white is getting ready to castle, it would still be a mistake because it would forget about the pawn on e4. Typically, you never ever want to lose any of your pieces, not even a little pawn, unless you have a good reason for it. And the good reason may be that on the next move around, you're going to capture one of your opponent's pawns or pieces. Or you will checkmate your opponent. Those, for example, are two very good reasons why or when you wouldn't need to mind losing material. However, unless you can prove that decisively on your next move or next couple of moves by force, don't give up material, not even a pawn. Let's go back to the game, and John, who played with the white pieces in this game, chose one of the good moves. Remember, when you are being attacked, what I mean is one of your pieces are being attacked, you typically have three choices. You may defend that pawn, in this case, with one of your pieces. For example, developing the knight and protecting it would be one good way. Another way to defend a pawn would be is to play d3, although that's not a very active move, but again, one of the better options in this position. Another option may be to counterattack one of the opponent's pieces. For example, if there would be a way to attack this rook or this pawn, that could be a way. It is not an option in this particular position though. And of course, thirdly, to simply run away. And in this case, running away means that right away at the same time, white is attacking an enemy piece. So here white achieves the ideal situation when combines defense with offense, moves away the attacked piece, and right away keeps the opponent busy by attacking the knight. And this was a critical moment in the game because now the black knight needs to move unless it wants to lose it, which certainly wouldn't be a good idea to lose a 3-point piece, a knight, versus a 1-point piece, a pawn. And the knight should go to d5 in the middle of the board. Of course, retreating to g8 wouldn't be a great idea because it develops backwards. So whatever one piece that black had developed, now it went back to its initial square. So that would be considered wasting time, and black should only do that if that would be the only way avoiding losing material. The other moves, like moving to h5, also don't look very good. Typically, you should try to avoid putting your knights to the edge of the board. Again, unless there is a specific reason that would result in some kind of gain for you. Moving to g4 would not be a great idea either, because the knight could be chased right away, and then the only safe place being is the edge of the board again. So all of these moves are not great ideas unless it would be the only way to avoid losing the knight altogether. So the best move was moving to d5. However, in the game, Patrick, who played with black, moved to e4. Thought, how nice, I'm centralizing my knight. However, you have to be cautious with that, especially when none of the other pieces have been developed yet. Now, when you see this position, it should be a little bit of a red flag whether you play with black or with white. If you look around and ask yourself, where can that knight move from e4 where it is right now? And if you look carefully, you will notice that the d6 square is guarded by white's pawn on e5. So is the f6 square. The g5 square is guarded by white's knight. The g3 square with either of the white pawns on h2 or f2. The c3 square by either of the b or the d2 pawn of white. The d2 pawn is, of course, well protected by 5 of the white pieces, and the f2 pawn is also guarded by white's king. So what that means is that if the knight could be attacked, the knight would be trapped. Now, it's a very important moment because white has several different ways to actually attack the knight. What would happen if white would move the knight to c3, threatening to then capture the knight on e4? Well, that would not be a good idea, because all that would do is offer an exchange on c3. If a knight captures a knight, that's considered an even trade, and white wouldn't have gained anything. How about if the white bishop would move out to d3, attacking the knight? Well, it is true that now the knight cannot jump away safely. However, the knight can be protected, defended safely. For example, by the pawn moving to d5. And now, if bishop captures, pawn captures, and giving up a bishop for a knight is not giving white any gain whatsoever. The same could be black's answer if white attacks the knight with the queen. Again, black safely could protect the knight for now. Therefore, the best move right now is to play d3. Typically, it's ideal to attack an enemy piece with a lower value piece, because what that means is that even if the attacked piece can be protected, it will still result material gain for your side. So right now, if the pawn would move still to d5, white would capture a 3-point piece and lose only a 1-point piece. Now, looking at this position, black should see what to do. Of course, you have to recognize that unfortunately the knight cannot be saved. Next thing is to see what's the best you can get out of it. In this case, the best black can get out of it is to at least get an enemy pawn. In some other cases, let's say you have to lose your queen, see if you can at least capture an enemy rook. So don't just lose a queen and don't win anything of your opponent's pieces. Now let me show this move. Queen a5 check. What would this result? Well, it's a tricky move because while white has many moves to respond to this move, only one of them actually is optimal. If white right now would block the check, for example, with the knight, that would allow the black knight to be rescued in a way that black could exchange the knight, get a knight for a knight. So black would be back in business. The same would happen if white would try to block the check with the bishop. Again, black would trade the knight for the bishop. Also, blocking the check with the queen would be even a lot worse because the knight would capture the queen. Moving the king out of the check is not a terrible move because the black knight still would be trapped. However, white would lose the right to castle. The best move in this position would be to block the check with the pawn. And then black would be still stuck with the knight, and the best the knight could do is give itself up for one of the white pawns. In the actual game, black chose to give up the knight on f2, which I would consider relatively the best choice. Why? Because not only that black gets a pawn for the knight, but at the same go, in order for white to win the knight, must capture it with the king. And what does this result? It results a change in the position in the sense that white no longer in this game can possibly castle. White lost the right to castle. In the next moves, both sides continued developing their pieces, which is a very natural and reasonable thing to do. Right now, white has a number of probably similarly good ways to develop. One thing is I would love to see the white king in a more secure position. So one option would be to play bishop e2, followed by rook f1, and then artificially castle by putting the king to g1. Another option, kind of trying to achieve the same, is to play g3 and develop the bishop on the big diagonal, and then again move the rook to f1 and the king to g1. Kind of in a slow motion, but still attempt to get to the castling position. And lastly, bishop e3 is certainly a reasonable move as well to develop the bishop. White in our game chose to play knight to c3, Very natural move, developing, controlling two of the important center squares. Black response was to play g6, a very logical move, to get the bishop out and then to castle. White continued also with a good move, bishop e2, getting ready to get the rook out of the corner so then the king can go to g1 towards the corner to a safe square. Of course, you would not want to move the king to g1 while the rook is still in the corner. Black responded with bishop to g7. Again, even though I haven't mentioned it every single move, whenever you play a game, you constantly need to ask yourself the question, what does my opponent want to do? And the answer may be, I don't know, nothing. There is no threat. But there are certainly many situations during a chess game when indeed your opponent is targeting specifically one of your pieces and wants to capture it. So if you don't pay attention to it, you will just lose material. For example, in this position, if white would follow up with a plan of trying to get the king to safety, that would result in giving up on the pawn for no reason, as the knight right now on e5 is safely protected by the bishop. Therefore, in this position, white found the correct move because white asked himself the question, what does my opponent want to do? Recognize that there are two enemy pieces attacking that same pawn on e5. Only one knight is protecting from f3, meaning white needs to bring further defense. And the natural way to do it is to bring the dark squared bishop out, which now a second time protects that pawn. Black castled, following the general opening principle. And white, now that there is no immediate threat, was ready to play rook f1 and then to put the king to safety on g1. Black played f6. Again, a moment when the question, what does my opponent want to do, can be answered with yes, there is a threat. Indeed, a third piece now has attacked the e5 pawn. If white now would ignore that and move the king to g1, the black pawn could capture because the pawn now is protected twice, just as many times as it is being attacked by white. Going back to the game, after f6, what are white's choices? Well, the most natural and best choice is to simply exchange the pawns on f6. And black captured back with the rook and again created a threat. Remember, every single move, be aware, what does your opponent want to do? Even if you miss one time, it can cost you the game. Your opponent may give you checkmate or capture one of your important pieces. In this case, the threat is on the bishop by the rook. So white better figure something out, either, as we know, one of three things. Either protect the attacked piece, run away, or attack an equally valuable piece of the opponent or more valuable. In this case, white has an ideal move, combining defense with offense again. White chose to play bishop to g5, moving away from the attack, while at the same time immediately attacking a more valuable piece than the bishop, the black rook. So what it means is that now if black would not move the rook, white would win a 5-point piece and lose only a 3-point piece after capturing the rook. Now, where would you bring your rook? It's a very important question to get a better feel of what's good and what's bad in positioning your pieces. Black in the game moved the rook to e6. It seems at first that there is nothing wrong with it. The rook is safe, it's not being captured right away, it's on an open file, and yet it's a very unnatural and awkward place for a rook. Here is the rule of thumb. Typically, you do not want to see your rook in front of your pawns. There are exceptions to that later in the middle game, but especially not at such an early stage of the game. Typically, you'd want to see your rook back on the 8th rank, where it's safe, and after you continue developing, the both rooks will be connected. We'll find out why it was not so good to keep the rook out there on the 6th rank. The problem typically is that the rook can be attacked, which at least may mean that white or the opponent wins time, keeping you busy moving constantly away from the attack, and as a worst case scenario, the rook may even get trapped. As you can see, even right now, the only safe move of the rook would be to move to d6, and that is why you'd want to keep your rook back on the 8th rank, where even though it may not have that many moves, it is very hard, if not impossible, to attack a rook. White now continued by finally creating the castling position, even though it took quite some time, not like in one move when you pick up the king and the rook at the same time and castle. White needed to waste several moves to get there, but ultimately White accomplished the objective. The king is in a safe location now. Black played knight e5, and this brings up an important question. Who does it favor the exchange of knights? Well, again, remember the rule of thumb. Whoever is ahead in material is happy to trade. If you're behind in material or have less valuable pieces than your opponent, typically try to avoid exchanging the rest of your pieces that you have. The more pieces you have, the better chance you may have for counterplay. White happily exchanged the knights, and the rook captured back. Again, you need to ask yourself the question, what does my opponent want to do? And black indeed is going after the bishop. White this time decided not to move it, although white could move it, for example to f4, but instead moved queen to d2, protecting the bishop, and at the same time connecting the two rooks between a1 and f1. When the two rooks have no pieces in between them, we call them being connected. Black responded with d6, and white finally brought the last sleeping piece to the game with rook a to e1. White's advantage is quite clear right now, having an extra knight, while black only has an extra pawn. Black made another mistake by playing h6. Of course, this move attacks the bishop. However, black forgot that the white queen hiding behind the bishop still has control over the h6 square, and therefore white could safely just capture the pawn, which white did. Black traded bishops, which again helps white, not only because it's exchanging pieces, but also because it brings white's strongest attacking piece, the queen, right near the black king. Black is in serious trouble. Again, white has a threat in capturing the pawn on g6. Black protected it with the rook, and now white played bishop g4, a very good move, attacking the rook, offering to exchange. Black traded rooks, and now white, of course, could capture back, but even better is to first capture the pawn with a check, since the rook on e1 does not run anywhere, and when the king moves to the corner, now to capture the rook. Now white is up not only a clear knight, but also has an extra pawn in addition. Now if black is careless, white would simply bring the rook up to e3 and then to h3 and checkmate the black king. That's why black had no choice but continue exchanging pieces, which of course results other problems. Queen g4, again, the threat is to bring the rook out and then checkmate. Therefore, black had no better choice than to offer an exchange of queens. White could trade immediately, but queen h4 is just as good, if not any better. Queen h7, white happily traded and picked up a few more pawns on the way. Check. King g8. Typically, when an enemy rook is on the 7th rank and you have a choice to go back to the 8th rank or move up to g6, it's a better option to move up so your king is not restricted to the 8th rank. Rook captured on b7. Now the black rook is stuck, protecting the pawn on a7. That's why black moved that pawn away, so the black rook can free up. But now white can start the attack against the black king and pawn. Of course, rook came to protect the pawn, and knight f6. Now the end for black is real close. If the king moves to the corner, checkmate in 1. Or, as in the game, the king went to f8. Now white has many ways to win. White could bring the king up to help, or simply push up the passed pawns. Here, in addition of just pushing them up as of trying to promote them, white can create a mating idea. d5, g5, and black played d4, and white played g6, and now black is helpless against the ending checkmate. If instead, just a couple of moves back, instead of playing d4, black would have played rook d6, that would have been a bit trickier because then white couldn't advance so simply without losing the knight, but then white would just advance the h-pawn and just keep pushing it in until it reaches the promotion square. A well-played game on white's side, and black had still a bit to learn from it. Good news for you, you can learn from Patrick's errors and hopefully you'll avoid similar mistakes. Thank you for listening and see you back next week. Bye-bye.